Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amita Kirpalani, and I'm one of the curators of contemporary art. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. They are the traditional owners of this land on which we are meeting, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge that this was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'd like to thank you for joining us here this afternoon, and as you know, there are a number of conversations on this stage, though in my opinion this is the most special. I'm really pleased to introduce Thomas J. Price and welcome you.
Thank you.
I'm going to give a really lightning fast intro to Thomas because we have a 30-minute set and we've got a bit to get through, 25 minutes now. So Thomas, as I'm sure you're all aware, works across moving image, photography and sculpture and has been doing so for the last 2 decades. He's best known internationally for his figurative sculptures. And as you know, in Federation Court, we have 2 incredible examples, all in and reaching out, that we can spy through the glass there. And these 2 works are a really incredible moment for us here at NGV Triennial on our opening day, and so we're excited to speak to you about them. Now, since we are doing the ridiculous thing of having a private conversation in public, I was thinking we should begin speaking about your performance work and going right back to a really early work, Licked.
Yeah, past tense.
I'm sorry, in the present, I forgot the
It's
ED.
okay.
I wondered if you could describe what that work was, and maybe we could sort of draw out some threads about how we see it connecting with the work in Federation Court.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. Yeah, Licked was a piece I made 20-something years ago. It was a performance piece where I literally, for 3 days, I licked the interior of a gallery space. So I licked the walls, not the floor. But about an hour in, my tongue started to bleed and it got increasingly more bloody. And so this work, which was initially supposed to be about this act of trying to connect, this surrounding people with an essence of a personality, became much more visible. It became a visual record of a physical endeavor of an individual to connect to an imagined or audience or to other people. So this performance, which resulted in an installation, changed.
Yeah, I'm so interested in the way that you conceive of this imagined audience, or you're sort of toying with this idea of this quiet or silent conversation with the gallery, not only in this work but through other projects. And have you had a minute to reflect on why you think you're interested in this silent conversation?
I think as a child, I was always an observer. So I was always watching and imagining and trying to figure out what was happening in people's minds. And I think, we do this as a way to kind of create security, as a way to navigate the worlds that we're trying to, initially process for the first time, especially when we're young, and then, navigate continually as things change. Circumstances change, politics change, social norms and elements change. So we're constantly in a process, I think, internally of trying to work out the world. And so for me, this conversation is really a conversation kind of having with myself. It's like, it's like a private but public conversation. So you're having these questions with yourself, you're trying to answer them, but you're fully aware that there's going to be people who are engaging in their own kind of journeys and using your work as starting point.
These unanticipated interactions. Well, maybe whilst we're thinking about your childhood, we could talk a little bit about your education, and we could talk, if we may, and talk a little bit about this journey that you've been on as an artist, where you grew up in Brixton, and then you went to a posh school, and then you went to the Royal College of Art. And so my sense is that this kind of clash of cultures, clash of classes, this sits in your work in a really important way.
Yeah, certainly. There's an awareness of of witnessing something or witnessing a space and place and actions and thoughts and norms which are different to what I had grown up with. So there's an awareness of all this kind of richness of difference. And this idea of difference, I think, probably comes into the sculptures. And this idea, but also of difference and then trying to connect. This idea of similarities woven into the cracks between the differences is this sort of universal, this idea of a universal. So yeah, I mean, being an observer, being an outsider, to use an overused term, but as an observer and an outsider, you have time to think and you question. And if you're artistically inclined, you use that process to sort of present almost solutions or answers, possible answers to yourself, you know.
I was accusing you the other day of being, I don't have the right word for it, but like an eavesdropper, but of...
I think you call me a creep.
Shh, don't reveal that here. So yes, as a professional creep, no, I'm interested in the way that that observing is really a huge engine for your work.
Yeah, totally. As I said, since a child, I've been fascinated by watching people and trying to understand or imagine what was happening, and you know, kind of placing, you know, myself in comparison or in sympathy with them. So, you know, this idea of empathy has kind of crept into the work, or an awareness of empathy, or the lack of empathy often. You know, this idea that we can be so similar and yet feel so apart from other people, and it happens constantly in society. So yeah, as a child, I was watching and trying to figure stuff out. As a young art student, I was literally kind of trying to present the innermost elements of myself and offer them up to people, you know, in saliva and blood to see what they made of it. And now, you know, the investment is in the time and the craft, the money and the scale to try to give people an opportunity to connect to themselves via these sort of portals.
So maybe we can focus on and really look specifically now at all in and reaching around, because my sense is that these are not, or you've described them not exactly as characters and not individuals, but that you're constructing fictions. Could you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, of course. So the basics to understand about the figurative works is that they are sculptures about statues. They are not statues in the way that statues have been used throughout the centuries to perform a certain role of defining and reinforcing who's in power, who we literally look up to. So you'll often see that these monuments and statues stand atop plinths, very high plinths, so you can't even reach the figure themselves. And they say, this is the goal, this is the ruler, this is who you look up to. Whereas, you know, although my works are very large, they stand on the ground. They share the ground that we stand on. And so they're very much about trying to reframe the familiar and make people aware of the things that surround us, these silent messengers to power and to authority and to complicity, you know, to be complicit in these structures by not questioning them. These works are trying to make people aware of what exists, and so that we have the, you know, and give the tools or the inspiration or the inclination to challenge or just to question. And it seems today that if you question things or people who are in power, it can be a very difficult, you know, experience to then live through.
And you've talked a little about the way that the unveiling of your work, or as we have today, the opening of your work, it reveals almost like a second part to the project where you're observing visitors have a moment. And we, the other day, were discussing that one of the people in our audience today said to me, that's my body. And that to me is probably the most profound response I've had so far to your work, and I anticipate that I'll have others. But I wondered if you could talk about this sort of like second, like these instances that, I don't know if you want to reference any, where you've had people deeply connect to your work in that way.
The kind of the privilege to place works that you work on individually, they mean something to you, you have all these questions, you and ah, you know, academically about these things, but then you actually get to place works in public, and then I get to witness the response from the public. And I always say that when I first put one out in the public, I didn't realize that other people had the same feeling necessarily. You know, I was working on this quite academic track about sculpture and the canon of monuments. But emotionally speaking, I didn't realize that people felt the same, and that you don't realize what you're missing until you see it or you get it sometimes. And to witness other people experiencing being seen, being accepted, being included, being valued in the way that we've been taught to appreciate and to value above all else, monuments, bronze, power, official, it was a big moment. And so seeing young children when I was installing, it's not like I don't hang around the works just like observing. I'm not like there with my camera, ticking off boxes. But when I'm installing works, it's often in the public, and before I even have installed the works and finished installing the works, people have run up to them and they've engaged with the works physically, and they've said who that reminds them of. They've said how they feel that's them. Like a young child ran up to an aluminium piece with a head, and they said, "There we are." And I have the photo of these young children with their hands on the faces of these large sculptures, and it's a humanizing moment. And all these, sometimes there's resistance to this idea of these fictional characters. Sometimes I put the works out and they go, "That's not who we are." Elements of society go, "That's not who we are," because people are so protective of the norm, of the recognized, of the things that they have subscribed to and built their lives around and invested all their energy in. People are so scared of change sometimes. But for me, when I see the moment of recognition from people who look like me, or people who don't even look like those sculptures, but recognize the humanity in them, the fact that they are not trying to rule over them, but they are part of them, they are an amplification of the celebration of their everyday, is quite something.
Can we also talk about their worldliness, or that you've made work that's been in London, and you've made work that's been in Marcus Garvey Park in Harlem and here in Melbourne? I mean, these contexts really, that's a further engine for the work. That's a further sort of set of references, and builds tension, I believe. And I wonder how that sits with you, or how the sort of tension emerges for you in these different contexts.
Again, it's incredible to see the different responses, or the more specific responses to the different locations. So I always find that these works sort of bring out what needs to be expressed within a certain area. So it's not like the exact same response is going to happen for work in Harlem in New York, for example, to here, to Rotterdam, to London, to Toronto, but there is a similarity. And the similarity seems to be carried by wherever there was colonialism, wherever there was oppression, or wherever there was a suppression of a true expression of who lives in those countries, of who built those countries, of who creates the society, the culture, who isn't valued, who has been waiting to be seen. That seems to come out from the placement of these large works which seem familiar, which seem relatable. And it's so strange that like 12-foot bronze sculptures can feel relatable. It's quite absurd in a way, but it's true. And because they are familiar yet so different to the things that we have been conditioned to accept and to literally look up to. So that tension was always there. There are places that, cities that think they're incredibly liberal. And then these works pop up. And then suddenly the papers, or there are action groups against the works, or there were stories able to come out which were quietened before, which didn't have the voice, didn't have a platform perhaps, didn't have a moment upon which other people, the people who live there, their conversations can then be amplified, can then be heard. Because for me, I'm an artist, I make a work, I put it down, I love what I do, I love talks like this, but really it's the people in those places who then give the works life. I don't give the works names apart from the titles, but people give them names, they give them identities, they give them a connection to their lives, and they give them life beyond whatever I could do. And so for me, the monuments really are come from the people who actually give them the meaning.
Why are they wearing Nikes? Why are they holding iPhones? Why do you position them in terms of these contemporary signifiers?
Have you heard of sponsorship? No, it's not that. For me, it's about the relatable, and it's about an acknowledgement of being recognized, and it's about a slightly, I guess, rebellious act within the context of presentation. So how people are read. So when I first started to make sculptures of people, it was all about the attributes. So there were phones, there were rings, there were watches, because these are items that people own and select. We don't just, well, I don't know, like, don't judge me on my trainers, but you put your shoes on, judge a man by his shoes. I have a work called From the Ground Up, and it's literally, people look at your shoes, they look at your watch, they go, okay. But if you are being judged within society as potentially dangerous, as suspicious, you have an understanding that what you wear and how you stand and what you do is being judged within a particular context. So these works really acknowledge a sensitivity and awareness of being judged and then presenting your sometimes your best self. But the fact that one guy has his hands in his pockets, reaching out, she's on her phone, it's about that. The true power is in being able to be yourself and not be performative, not have to smile the whole time so that, they know, oh, he's okay. To be absorbed in your trueness, in your everyday, internal moments of relax. To be relaxed in a public space as a non-white person sometimes is not the easiest thing. So for me, these works are exercises in true power, true monuments to what it means to be free.
Absorbed in your trueness. I love that. That's so beautiful. Can we talk about their eyes? I'd like to sort of get you to describe why maybe you could describe their eyes for us.
Again, for me, there's power in the ambiguity of these works, all right? So I'm not trying to be didactic. I'm not trying to tell you this is who this person is. That their name is this, they live like this, they've done this. And the eyes, the void, or the way that the eyes are scooped out is the last part of that, or certainly an important part of that. And it's about, so if you go to museums or go upstairs and if you can find a bust of a head, you might see the pupil is drawn on, because the artists are telling you they're looking over there, or this is the dilation. For me, I want to draw the viewer in. I want you to be the last piece in that puzzle to engage psychologically in the identity of that. So basically, to take responsibility for your reading of these people and to draw you into their psyche, because these works are exercises in empathy. They are trying to talk to communication and talk to connection and to bridge potential gaps.
And you've described them as relating to experience over identity. Why have you described them in that way?
Well, for me, it's about the commonality. I think we ultimately, on a base level, humans experience the world in a very similar way. We have the same needs. Now, they're not always met. In fact, they're very rarely met. And they're certainly not met in the same ways. But we are human. But, we might look different, but the psyche, the needs, the wants, the need to be understood, the need to be accepted, the need to be seen for who you feel you really are, I think is universal. And I think it's very powerful. And I think a lot of the troubles that we experience as people comes from not getting that, or becomes from suppressing that because you don't think you can get that. So if you think you're never going to get something, if you think you're never going to be valued, if you think you're never going to find love, if you think you're never going to have any of these things, you might tell yourself, don't need that. And then you live your life accordingly. So for me, it's very important that these are psychological portraits. These are fictional people to create real moments. And it's about us seeing ourselves in these characters, potentially, because we've all stood with our hands in our pockets. I think pretty much everybody now has been on their phone. I think pretty much, we live our lives through these portals to the outside world, and yet we often feel so isolated. So this, the title of the work, Reaching Out. Is she reaching out? Is she being reached out to? Am I trying to reach out to an audience? There's all these things. All in, this guy with her hands in his pockets. The freedom to just stand in a public space with your hands in your pockets if you wear a tracksuit and you happen to be a black person, black man, is not necessarily there. Like, I got stopped and searched by the police outside of my studio because I was standing outside it. So, there's a lot going on, but for me, it's not about trying to do the same thing that monuments have been doing. So it's not about being just as good as these guys on statues. Now I, too, can be on a horse. No. It's about questioning those values. Do we want to be atop a plinth? Do we want to be riding horses and being conquerors? Or do we want to find the humanity in one another?
Perhaps as a concluding question, I wanted to ask you about how performance continues to sit in association or in parallel with your sculptural practice. What does it give you, or what do you think it fuels, or how does it open parts of the
That's a
work?
tricky question. I mean, for me, it's almost like the encountering of the works is almost a performance. But so when I see people navigating the works, when I see people registering those works, even if it's just a selfie, that for me is performative in a good way. It's not performative from the individual trying to present themselves in their best possible light, but it's about a visual moment whereby we, witnessing this, can see played out for us this idea of encounter and that navigation or negotiation of identity. So in terms of my own practice and performance, I hung up my tongue a long time ago and I haven't licked a room since, but figuratively speaking. But it resides in my brain, it resides in my thinking, it resides in my understanding of how this work functions, this work outside functions. They are not, as I say, they are not statues. They are an expression or a continuation of that thought process which led to the licking of the room, which led to animations, which led to painting and all sorts of things. But I use that format because it connects to us in a way that we understand. So will I be performing again? No, but the work is important to understand what these truly are.
Thomas J. Price, thank you so much for your work and your time thinking with us today.
Thank you very much, and thank you all very much, and I hope you enjoy it.
We hope that you'll stick around for the next talk at 2:15, and there are several others throughout the galleries today, so stick with us and we'll see you soon. Thank you.